So Dr. Kim, what do you mean by physical intimacy?
Most of the people, when you say that, they think of sexual relationship. I think it goes to any kind of physical touch, and it doesn't have to be sexual, but I think just the touching, hugging, holding someone, back massage, all those kind of things. I think in the sexual part, it's the part that a lot of times we rush through, and that's foreplay and that's definitely physical intimacy, and certainly the sexual relationship. Anything that has to do with that would be physical intimacy.
Yeah, that's good. The way I kind of look at it, which is kind of a creepy definition, but intentional, tender touch.
Oh, that's good.
It sounds really weird, but it's like, if you accidentally touch each other, like that doesn't count. Like if you're like, oh, you're in bed together and your foot touches his foot, like that's not physical intimacy. But if it's
Right.
intentional and if it's tender, so if you did it on purpose and if it's tender and affectionate, it could be holding hands, it could be scratching his back, or anything sexual and anything in between. All of those things are physical intimacy. So it's not just sex, but it's also not just like any random touch, because I actually touch my cat sometimes and that's not physical intimacy.
No,
She like runs across my feet. Like that's not okay.
Yes, the cat that ran away.
Yeah, the cat that ran away. Hey, she's back. It's all
And
good.
she's back. It's back. Yeah, and I love because I think the word that you used when you said tender is a real important word to women, and I think as guys we don't think about that much, but I think that's something Nancy taught me. Just the gentleness and tenderness of touch means so much more than if we're a little rough or whatever, and that kind of thing. And so I think for us guys, we've got to remember that tenderness and gentleness is really important to our lives.
It really is. Tender is one of my favorite words, my all-time favorite words. And Dylan hates vulnerability and tenderness, so that's fun in our marriage. Oh, goodness.
Maybe you have a big sign above your bed that just says tender.
Tender Town, not Tinder.
Yeah,
tender.
Right.
Those are different things.
Exactly.
Yes. All right. Well, Dr. Kim, we're talking about, little to no physical intimacy here in this podcast. Define little in this scenario. How much physical intimacy is good to have on a regular basis?
It's always such a tough question because I think it can vary couple to couple depending on situations. I think just the things we talked about, holding hands, hugging, I think those things should be every day. There is something, if you haven't really consciously, when you come home or you both of you get home in the evening and you do a long embrace, how that energizes you. God made us with all these touch receptors in our bodies, and so that energizes us. So don't miss out on those things. As far as the sexual thing, I always recommend a couple times a week, 1 to 2 times a week. I think depending, you may be some situations. I think there's times where I see couples really struggle with that is certainly when they have kids, if you got 2 or 3 kids and everything, and it can be a week or 2 goes and you haven't been intimate at all sexually. And I think you have to be very intentional about that. And I've told the story a lot of times about a lady we talked about. And so she put TS twice a week on her calendar. That meant sex, because she knew if she didn't get her mind thinking about it, it probably wouldn't happen because other things are going to jump up. And so I think you have to there's times, stages in your life, you have to be very intentional about that. You just don't want it to have a time period pass where I had a couple not too long ago, they had not had sex in about 18 months. And for different reasons, but it was really difficult for them. It was like they were starting all over again to come back again. It was like they were 2 strangers again. So, and plus God designed us. I mean, our bodies fit perfectly together. He designed sex not only to help us procreate and have children, but also for enjoyment. Song of Solomon is so clear about that when it talks about the sexual relationship between this man and this woman, this husband and wife in that book. And so it is important. And I think if we don't do it, then we're going to miss out on those things. So talk about it. I guess what I would say, define what your normal is for the 2 of you. I would say I would really encourage you for it to be at least once a week.
Yeah, that is so good. Everything that you said there was so good, Dr. Kim. That was just like a myriad of wonderful things. All great stuff. I agree with you. I think when it comes to actual like sexual intercourse, it needs to happen at least once a week for a myriad of reasons. One of the reasons being, it connects your soul, and it's like it's a connection point beyond just the physical, because it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's your souls connecting and mingling together. But then also like the practical side of it's a physical act. And if you're not working those muscles, right, there's no other scenario where you're in those sexual positions. Hopefully, I mean, that'd be weird. And so you're working muscles that you only work in that one area. And so if you're only having sex once a month, like that's not enough time to work your muscles for them to be strong enough to do that well on a regular basis. And I just don't think, anything less than once a week is regular. Like if you do something once a month, that's 12 times a year. That's like nothing.
Yeah.
And so I think once a week is definitely necessary. And then when it comes to just the normal non-sexual touching of the physical, like intentional, tender touches, I think daily as well, but I think at least 3 to 5 times a day, I
Yeah.
would say, because you
Yes.
think like in the morning, when you get home from work, and then before bed, because if you're just doing it in the morning and at night, that's just like a routine. I mean, that's just like brushing your teeth. You don't even think about it.
Right.
So I tend to lean towards 3 to 5 times a day, because then it's intentional and it's actually connecting and it's like spontaneous and planned. Like I feel like you need both of those things. You need the planned, hey, I'm going to kiss you before you leave for work every day. But then you also need the spontaneous, hey, you look nice. I like your shirt. I'm going to pat you on the shoulder, or like
Yeah.
touch your cheek or kiss your forehead, or you
Yeah.
need both for it to be good.
I think so. And I think it goes back to when we talk about when you think something good about your spouse, say it. When you think about the physical touch, do that at that time, and just try to be more intentional about that, and let it become something that becomes just natural. I love to hug Nancy. I love it. Actually, we've been recording podcasts this morning. Between podcasts, I went to get some coffee. She's sitting in there. And so I kissed her on the neck and then came back in here. I mean, just looking for the opportunities are there all the time. You've just got to start doing them. And if you're not doing them, I get it. It may feel a little awkward at first. I think your spouse is going to like it. I think they're going to receive it. I think it'll become more and more comfortable. You just got to, if it's not happening, you got to take that jump. And if you're not having sex once a week and there's no physical problem or other reason, we understand that. It's time to sit down and talk about it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And we actually have a great resource when it comes to having sex, and it talks about frequency as well, but it's called the Love Making Survey that came out a couple months ago. The response we've received from it is so good, and it's such a great resource. I know I'm biased, but it is a phenomenal. So we'll link that in the show notes. But if you're struggling in this area, if you clicked on this podcast on purpose, you've got to download this resource, because it is so, so good.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would say too, for the fellas, so I'm gonna speak to the fellas for a second, because I'm a woman and I can do that. When it comes to this physical intimacy, this intentional tender touch, it has to be non-sexual sometimes in order for us to feel loved. I feel like so often it's just really easy for guys to only touch their wives sexually and in a sexual way. So you're only touching certain parts of her body, or only doing something hoping it will lead to sex. But a non-sexual touch is just huge for most women. And so holding her hand, hugging her, playing with her hair, scratching her back, embracing her, doing something that isn't probably going to lead to sex matters so much to a woman.
I think what you find is that I found is you consistently do that, your sex life gets better. And I think every time your wife thinks you're going to touch her, that's your goal is to get her to have sex with you. It just does something. A woman needs to know that you want to touch her just because you want to touch her, just because you want to hold her, or you want to feel her touch, or you want to touch her skin or her hair or something like that, or do something that makes her feel good by tickling her back or things like that. And I think if we do that consistently, the balance, if you think, well, if we do that, we'll never have sex. I don't think that's going to be true at all. I think it's going to really, because she's going to feel valued and that you do care about those areas. And I think what I learned, and Nancy taught me that, I learned to really enjoy those. I mean, I love cuddling. I love just, spooning, and I love all those kind of things, and knowing that it doesn't have to always lead to sex, and it's okay if it doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And I would even say that not only does it make your wife feel loved, but it makes her feel comfortable. So if
Good.
you're touching her on a regular basis, it's going to make her feel comfortable when you touch her, which is going to make her feel more comfortable in the bedroom. So all of this, which is going to make your sex life
Yeah.
better if your wife feels really free and comfortable in the bedroom. And so I think all of this stuff matters so much.
So guys, if all you're touching are your wife's breasts and her genital area,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to her body than that, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
You said
Just
it.
get it
You
out
said
there.
it.
Yeah.
Let's just get out there. The other thing that I'm like desperately waiting for this podcast that I know is coming is you're going to say naked and unashamed, aren't you, Dr. Kim? Aren't you going to bring up your favorite verse? It hasn't
We'll
happened yet.
just kind of see.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. I can't wait. All right, Dr. Kim. So why is this a problem in marriage? Why did this make your top 10 list? What happens when we have little to no physical intimacy in our marriage?
I love the Hebrew word dod, which is used in in the Hebrew word, and it was about the sexual relationship, but it was much deeper than just the physical. It was like coming together of the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual part of it. And as Christians in our sexual relationship, I think we have something that non-Christians don't have. We have the spiritual thing. We're both believers in Christ. There's something spiritual. The Holy Spirit lives in each one of us, and don't feel weird about connecting God and sex, because God's the one who invented it. He's not a prude. And so when you think about that and all those come together, that is the best sex ever. And so you don't want to miss out on that. And I think so. And then the other kind of touching, I think if we don't do, holding hands and things like that, it does make the sexual awkward, or your spouse think that the only thing you want is to be sexual. And we know that the sexual relationship has been important. It's always been important. In the Garden of Eden, they were naked and ashamed. There you go.
Yeah,
And
there you go. I was waiting for it.
well, because I think at that time, because there's such, the reason I say that a lot is because it's such a picture, I think, of what God wants us to have. There's a total vulnerability. There was nothing standing between them and each other. All those barriers that we put. And I think that's what God wants for us. That's what Dode is to be naked and unashamed and just totally embrace everything in your total being with each other.
Yeah, that is so good, Dr. Kim. Absolutely. And I appreciate you quoting that verse, your favorite
Yes.
verse. That's so good.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it in every podcast.
I know.
On parenting, it's a little hard.
Everything else is right there. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that a big reason this is such a problem in marriages, if this is a problem for you, the reason it can really hurt your marriage is because of expectations, right? There's an expectation that if you're married, you're going to have sex, and you're going to have sex on a semi-regular basis. And that's not a bad expectation. But what happens is if it's not happening, an expectation and a need is not being met. And so the other spouse is going to feel unwanted, unloved, unattractive, and just a lot of things. So there's so much with this. Body image is tied into this. Self-worth is tied into this. Your own physical needs are tied into this. Your emotional needs are tied into this. Your spiritual needs are tied into this. And so physical intimacy is just such a big deal. Like you were explaining with the word dode, this just matters so much. And we're meant to do it in marriage. And it really does help connect us on so many levels. And so it's just important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how does this end up happening in marriage, right? Most honeymooners are having sex all the time or touching each other all the time. What then happens to change this?
Oh, we talk about, we kind of drift apart. I think things like we've talked about some of the things in the series of unresolved conflict, things that kind of get in a way and put a little bit of a wedge between us. I think it happens when maybe when in a sexual relationship, your spouse is trying to communicate some things to you that they want and need, like to be there. They don't feel like you listen to that. Just a lot of that junk can begin to fill in. So it goes from being naked and unashamed to you got your clothes on and you're not willing to be vulnerable because you don't, maybe it doesn't, you're not as trusting or whatever that is, but some negative things begin to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, when you're first married, I mean, I can remember thinking, wow, sex will solve any problem the rest of our lives. That didn't really work out that way. It was like solving the problem and then have sex, And so just being intentional about it, and whatever stage of life you're in. I get it. I had a couple one time, and they got married, and they were both, one was starting medical school, the other was starting dental school at the same time, first year of marriage. And it was crazy. And that we met probably 3 months into their marriage, because everything they dreamed of wasn't happening, because they were exhausted, they were tired, they were busy. And so we had to kind of put a plan and put some balance in that where they could be more intentional with each other.
Yeah, that's good. I think for a lot of couples, the reason this happens is it's just a slow fade. Like it's not something that's like, something happens and then you just cut off sex from your spouse altogether. It's a slow, you start having sex less and less, start touching each other less and less. And then all of a sudden you're so distant and you can't remember the last time you touched one another. And so I think we have to be careful of that slow fade. And then I think another big piece of this that we have to pray against is the devil, right?
Yep.
I love what it says. I don't know who said it originally because it's been quoted a million times since then. But when you're single, the devil tries to get you in the bed, and when you're married, he tries to keep you out of the bed. And it's just
So
true.
good.
And so, Satan doesn't want you to be connected. He doesn't want you to have a great marriage. He doesn't want you to be edified and to do the spiritual thing that God created. And so he's trying to get you distracted, tired, to not feel unattracted to your spouse, to separate you in any way he can. And what better way to do that than to keep you out of the bed, and better yet, in the bed with someone else?
No, absolutely. And yeah. And I think the other thing by, as you hear this today, of knowing how important this is, if you're not working on it, that's one of the best things that affair proofs your marriage. If your sex life is good, like I, I would not think about giving up what we have and what we've built over time for an affair. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm still not vulnerable. I get that. But you build something great in your marriage and the sex relationship. There is nobody that knows me like Nancy. There's nobody. I know her better than anyone else. I know what she likes in a physical relationship, all those kind of things, and what she doesn't like. And I wouldn't give that up for anything.
Yeah, it's good. Absolutely. Affair proof your marriage. Have sex
Yeah.
regularly and touch
Yes.
each other non sexually too, guys. Don't forget that part. I'm going to remind
Yes.
you again. Good stuff. Well, what do we do if our spouse doesn't seem interested in us? What if we're not the problem? Our spouse is. How are we supposed to deal with that when it comes to how we feel about ourselves, our self worth, and our attractiveness?
That's hard. I think the first thing, and it shouldn't be tried, but your spouse does not define you. God does, and God sees you as desirable and attractive, and all those things that you want to be. The issue may be some things that have happened in your marriage. I would say that's usually it, because I've seen people that other people might not think are very attractive, and they adore each other, and they have great sex life and all those kind of things. So it's not the outward appearance, it's what you do to build that relationship internally. So I would say you got to get help and get counseling. I mean, if your sex life is floundering, one, it makes you so much vulnerable to other things like an affair and things like that, and two, you're missing out on a lot. So if they don't seem interested, I think you say, I want our sex life to be what it was. I think we need some help right now. Are you willing to go to counseling with us? Let's find a Christian counselor that really works in this area and really see if we can get that back. I want that to be a part of our lives as long as we live together. And
Yeah.
it can be. I mean, a few years ago, it was a second marriage. They both lost spouses. They valued marriage so much. They also valued the sex relationship. One thing we talked about at one of the sessions about their sex relationship, and now with medications, that can go on their whole life. And
Yeah.
so but what got me out of that more than anything, they knew what that meant. They had experienced that. And because God had brought this other person in their life, they wanted to experience it in this relationship too, because they knew how valuable it was.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a physical value, but
No.
they knew what else that would do for them. I
Yes.
love that. What a sweet
Yep.
story. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, I think if this is a problem for you, I agree with you 100%. It's time to get help and not to just sit in that or to be settled with that. But I also think when it comes to your self-worth and your identity, you've got to remember that that is in Christ. It's not in your
Yep.
spouse. It's not in how your spouse sees you or what your spouse does with you physically. And it's certainly not in your sexuality and what is or is not taking place when it comes to your sex life, because you just can't let, as good of a gift as sex is from God, it doesn't define you. It's just a thing. It's great, it's beautiful, it's powerful, but at the end of the day, it's still just a thing that God created. It's not God himself, and we need to worship God and not sex. And I say it all the time because I feel like our culture so identifies everything based on sex and acts like sex is the ultimate thing, and we can't make something that we are not even allowed to do in public the ultimate thing. Like, it's
Right.
just like sex camp, even as good as it is, as great as we want you guys to have physical intimacy, both non-sexually and sexually, it's not the ultimate thing. So yes, get the counseling. Yes, work to get towards where you are having sex again with your spouse. But as far as who you are based on that, it doesn't define you, and what your spouse is or isn't doing with you physically does not define who you are and what you matter, because you matter enough that Christ came for you and he died for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well said. And I think too, I always kind of want to talk to couples, think about if your communication is good and you're working on things and you're resolving conflict well and you're handling your finances well, all those things we talk about, to me, the sex is kind of the icing on the cake. And usually if those things are in place, the sexual relationship happens because you're really connected. And the more you're connected, I think that's just a natural outgrowth of that you're so connected and you're so attracted to each other, not just the physical part of it, but just of who you are and what you've built together.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that brings up a really good point, Dr. Kim, of likely there's an underlying issue. Either
Yeah.
there's something physically going on that you need to get some physical help with, and that's why your spouse isn't having sex with you. Like, as far as like maybe your spouse doesn't have enough testosterone or estrogen or whatever that is. But also it could be that, yeah, that you have some underlying issues that you aren't even aware of. Your spouse has built walls with you that haven't communicated to you. You guys are having issues financially. You guys are having conflict issues. You're having issues raising kids, and it's coming out in your sexual life. The evidence is there, but you're not making those connections. And that's where a counselor can really come in and help you make those connections so that you can deal with it. And so your spouse can see, well, why aren't they being physical with you? Maybe there's some
Yeah.
reasons that they're not even aware of that are solvable.
Yeah, I always encourage couples to check out medically. I think sometimes it's hard. I think guys are pride. You don't want to go to a doctor and say, hey, I'm having trouble with ED or whatever like that. But one thing I would say, and because I feel pretty strong about this, most people where you live, you probably hear, especially on sports stations, ads about men's medical clinics, stuff like that. If you're having a problem, whether it's with the energy for it or erections or that kind of thing, I would find a good urologist that people respect. Go to that person first, because I think they're going to have the right answers for you, and it's going to be coming from someone that is well trained, skilled in that area. And so that's just my recommendation, because I've had a couple of people that I know that have gone to some clinics, and I'm not dissing all the clinics. I'm just saying that was a bad experience for both of them, and they spent a ton of money and nothing happened.
Yeah.
But I know that, like my urologist, there's other urologists that I recommend for guys to go to, and that's the right approach.
Yeah. And I would say the same for women. So finding a good GYN, that
Yeah,
is a professional that you like, that you feel comfortable talking to, is going to be better than a free women's clinic or other free resources that are out there. And you need that anyways for your health, right? Your body matters. And
absolutely.
so you need to be going to see your GYN at least once a year. And so finding one that you really like and that you can talk to and that has the same motivations as you, that isn't just writing off. Like, if you, I don't know, I've heard of some women going to a GYN and talking to their practitioner about it, and their practitioner's like, oh, well, you don't have to have sex. It's not a big deal. Like, you're fine, right? And it's like, no, like, I really do want this for my marriage, so I need help.
Yeah,
Or they'll just brush it off and say, yeah, women don't want to have sex. That's not just men. And it's like, no, like, something has changed hormonally with me, like, is what people are saying. And they need help to solve the problem. So go to a GYN that's going to help you solve the problem. If there's a difference that you've noticed, that there's probably something going on there that a good GYN who wants to help you in that area can actually help you with. And we live in such a blessed time right now where there's all kinds of medical ways and prescriptions
right.
and things that can solve these problems and these imbalances, or whatever it may be, to help you.
Yeah, and when I said I kind of left out, there's a lot of good general practitioners that deal with this area too. So if that's who your regular doctor is, go to that person first. The reason I say urologist, because some guys do, there can be some other things that urologist may be able to help you with. But start somewhere with a medical doctor. Tell them what the deal is. General practitioner will probably give some medications or give you some ideas, and then start there, and then take whatever next steps you need to. But fight that battle.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, how do we talk to our spouse about the lack of physical intimacy or the lack of initiation on their part when it comes to this area in our lives?
I think you sit down and say, I listened to this podcast. I remember our physical intimacy, because most people have the time in their life that it was really good. And you can say, I want us to get back to that. I hear about couples that are having sex in their 80s, and I want to, and loving it and enjoying it and keeping it together. I want that for us. And I think the initiation thing, and I'll speak this to the women since I'm a guy, usually we're going to be the ones that initiate. I mean, that seems to be most couples that I talk to. It means so much to us if every once in a while you guys initiate. That doesn't mean all the time or something, but it helps us a lot. Of in sex, we want to know that we can please you and that you want to be with us. And so the time when you initiate every once in a while, it means a lot to us. And so I would encourage wives to just, do that every once in a while. You don't have to do it every time, or maybe not even once a month, but just initiate every once in a while for the guy. And and if the lack of physical intimacy, again, you can sit down together and define what your normal is. And we've talked in this about once a week or twice a week or whatever. If your normal is once a month and that works for both of you, and you're doing a lot of the other touching and that's working, it's got to be what works best for you. And I think getting it on the table and talking about it. And maybe you start with an area that say, okay, we haven't had sex in 3 months, and so we're going to have sex once a month. We're going to be intentional about that. And then maybe after a while you say, let's go to every 2 weeks, or just continue to work on it. If you don't feel comfortable jumping from once every 3 weeks to twice or months to twice a week, then take a step at a time, and don't compare yourself to other people and other couples. Define it for yourself.
And I think for the women out there who are listening who might be feeling a little weird, because you're not weird if you're the one who initiates more, or if you're the one
Right.
whose husband isn't engaging. We hear from couples all the time. Dr. Kim counsels couples all the time where that is the case. So yes, stereotypically, like, it is the men who are wanting to have more sex than women. That is true, but there's still a ton of women where that is reversed, and that's okay. You're not weird. You're not abnormal. It is a good thing that you want to have sex with your husband. And if he's having some problems, you can do all these same things and sit down with him and talk to it, and work towards better and more physical intimacy in marriage.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As we were talking about this podcast, I was thinking I've never had, usually in every marriage, one is the one who has the higher drive and initiates. Most of the time it's the guy. I've had a number of women where it's the women. I always wondered why. God probably smart, because he doesn't put two that want to initiate all the time together. Probably because they wouldn't get anything else done. That
Yeah.
it would just be physical relationship all the time. And so I think God, in God's wisdom, it's like that. If you are the woman that have our drive, your husband may not have as high a drive, and that's okay. That was part of God's design there. And together you can make it work out, just like a guy that has more desire than his wife does.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's one of those things we won't really know on this side of heaven, but I wonder sometimes if it's like a little bit of the result of the fall, that we live in a broken world. So I was speaking to a woman recently who was just like really torn up about, she found out that her husband had been looking at porn, and he was repentant and they were going to work through it, but she was just like so hurt that he had looked at other images of other women. And she was like, I don't understand why God would make men so sexual, that they need to see things, that they want to have sex more than I want to have sex. Like, why would God do this kind of thing? And I was like, well, I don't really think he did. Sex is a good gift. So I do think he made men visual for that purpose, and to have a drive for a reason, because it's a good gift. But the reason it's wonky, I mean, maybe it's because of what we have done, the fall. And I
Yeah.
think definitely what our society, specifically today in America, we've overhyped sex so much, and everything has been made sexual, and a man can't go anywhere or do anything without seeing inappropriate things. Like, that's on us. That's not on God. And I think we've also, because our society has over sexualized things, men think of things more sexually than they probably would have if we didn't live in this culture. So, like, for instance, I've had friends who have traveled to other countries, and the women dress differently and dance differently. Like, for instance, in like African countries where they dance, and like sometimes they're wearing less clothing, especially on the top half of their body, but it doesn't seem like the men are over sexualizing them. And I wonder if it's like, well, they're not seeing ads all the time of women who are basically being treated like objects, and like pop culture where women are dancing half naked around a guy and everyone's bumping and grinding. Whereas like these women are kind of doing some crazy gyrating dances over there. And it's more like just like cultural and awesome and beautiful, but it's not like sexual. And so I think a lot of this is on us and on sin. It's not that God created this to be bad. We've ruined it a little bit,
Yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, as you were saying, that we live in probably the most sex liberated, charged nation time that maybe, well, there's some pretty rough ones in Bible times too,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly in today, and we probably have more problems with sex than anybody
Yeah.
does, and so I think for guys, yes, we're visual. I think one of the things that I heard my pastor say a number of years ago, and it hit me so hard, and I thought, that's my solution, and it's bouncing your eyes. You don't have to, if something comes in your line of vision, if there's a woman that's not dressed that she's scantily dressed, or if it's a magazine that you happen to see as you walk out, or it's a billboard or whatever, you don't have to stare at it. And I think if you get in the habit of bouncing your eyes, in fact, Nancy, when we were on a recent trip, and she said, did you see that woman? I said, not really. And she said, you really do a good job of that, don't you? And that made me feel so good. She knows that I've worked it, because I could be like anybody else. I could sit there and stare someone down. You could million dress people, all that kind of stuff. But you learn to bounce your eyes, and then your wife won't be thinking that you're wanting someone else instead of her. And I think that's the thing that a lot of times as guys, we don't understand with pornography. It makes your wife wonder why you're doing that when you have her. She
Mm.
needs to know that your desire is for her. And if you put it there and you cultivate that, for me, those other things just kind of fade away. I don't have a desire to look at pornography. I don't have those desires because of what I have with Nancy. And it took us a long time to get there. I'm not saying we were there all the time, but I get it. I get what God's design is. And I get why he says one man for one woman. I get it
Yeah.
because
His
it's,
way is better.
it's beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
good. I love that. So, Dr. Graham, what if it's been so long since we've been intimate or had a routine of sex? It might feel awkward to start back up. What advice do you have to couples that are listening and they're like, oh, we have to do this again for the first time in forever?
Yeah, I know, and it is awkward. I had one couple say we feel like we're 16 again. We're awkward. We don't know what to do. All kinds of stuff like that. I think you start slow, and I think it's okay. I've had couples and it was awkward, and I said let's just start slow. Let's say maybe you start out and you just take a shower or bath together. Maybe you do massaging. Maybe you just lay together naked with no with intercourse not the goal, and just hold each other, and then maybe you take a step where it becomes a little more sexual. And what I'm saying is rebuild it the right way. Don't feel like you've got to jump right in bed and it happens, and then maybe because you didn't take time it causes more problems. Because I've had couples where I think one of the things where it really does cause take some time is when there's been an affair, and say the guy had the affair and then he works hard, they're back together, he's committed this marriage, but there's a lot of things going through his wife's mind at that point. She's going to think, is he comparing me to her? All those things that you have to get past. And so in those situations, I think counseling and then helping a couple take it a step at a time. And what I tell a woman, when he chose to be with you, he chose you. And you've got to realize that that's where he is now. He chose you, and you guys are going to build something stronger than anything you ever had. You're going to fair-proof your marriage in a lot of ways. And one of those is going to be the sex relationship.
Yeah, that is good advice. Start slow. I like it. So, where should a couple place their expectations if this has been a problem for them, but they both do agree they want to fix things?
I think I would, again, communication on it. I would start, say you talk about, well, okay, we want to do our physical intimacy. So we're going to start being more intentional about hugging, maybe kissing each other during the day. Start with that. And maybe you say, okay, if we start back in a sexual relationship, what would you like to see us be? And go, whoever says the least amount, start with that amount. And it's if the guy says 3 times a week and the wife says once every other week, go with once every other week. And that takes a lot of pressure off. And then you can, because you want to build it where it's enjoyable for both of you. Or if there is a problem, like I know sometimes I've had women where there becomes a painful issue, and then she may need to go to her OB/GYN and kind of work some things out. Just take it a step at a time. You've got time to do that. And the process can be a lot of fun too. We kind of think the end goal is always intercourse, which is great. God gave us that gift, but there's a lot of other things in that process that are a lot of fun and enjoyable for both of you.
Yeah, definitely. That is good advice. So again, just kind of starting slow and having the expectations. That's going to be a process. I agree. I've talked to a lot of couples where this has been an issue for them. They feel like they had a great conversation, that the problem was solved, and then they didn't have sex the next day. So the one spouse that wants the sex feels super defeated. But I think you can't expect things to just turn around in one day. If you have agreed to have sex once a week, then, you have 7 days to fulfill that. So you can't assume that, oh, that means we're having sex tonight. Oh, that means we're having sex tomorrow. Just more and more, the more you can communicate about it, the better. And again, it might take your spouse who hasn't been thinking about sex. I love what the story you share about the TS, the think sex.
Mm-hmm.
If your spouse hasn't been thinking about sex, they may need time to process if they're more of a processor about like what that's going to look like and mentally kind of get there. And that has nothing to do with you and nothing to do with your past sex life and everything to do with them and how their mind works. So don't take it personally. Just give them the space that they need to mentally process, oh, we're going to start having sex again, or, oh, we're going to start being more tenderly touching on a regular basis. Give them time, have patience.
Yeah. And I think you agree. Women do have to be more intentional about thinking about it than guys do. All the studies show that usually guys think about sex a lot more. And so, for a lady that's calendar, I was just thinking you can send a reminder. You can do a lot of things. And starting out, if you have to be, and I had a couple a few years ago, and so they said, yes, we're going to have sex once a week, but then a week had passed and they hadn't. So they made a time. They decided Sunday afternoon was a good time for both of them. And so that became their time. So sometimes you might have to put something down. This is when this is going to happen, and jump into it to get it started again. All that stuff is okay. I think, we went through a time where we were not as able to be as spontaneous. It was kids, and so we scheduled them more, and it felt kind of weird. You think you want sex to be spontaneous, you get excited about each other, and then you have sex. It was fine when we made and put it on the calendar for that season of our lives, because it made sure that we had that. We didn't lose that time.
Yeah, I think that's good. I know a lot of couples who do that, especially in the season that Dylan and I are in with young kids. I've talked to several couples who are like, yeah, we have sex on Tuesdays and Fridays. Like, that's what we do. And
Yeah.
that's okay. Like, that's okay for it to be like, every Tuesday. And honestly, like, yes, that takes some of the spontaneousness out of it, but it also adds some like building momentum in your mind of just like, well, you can start thinking about sex on Tuesday morning. And by the time the evening comes, you're both like really ready to go. And it ends up being a great experience.
Yep.
So there are pros and cons to that. And I think it's okay to schedule sex, especially if that's the only way it's going to happen. Do it.
You can also put a Disney movie on. It gives you an hour and a half.
Yeah, leave those kiddos by themselves. They'll be all right. They'll be right.
Or shower, I've had a couple of thought of that, shower together every day and probably twice a week. That was a place where they had sex. I mean,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
whatever you make work for yourself.
Totally. You can put them in, even the babies, you can leave them in the crib for 45 minutes. We won't call CPS on you. It's all good.
Exactly.
Oh, goodness. Good stuff. Well, this has been a great conversation. I hope this helps a lot of couples just work towards better intimacy and more intentional, tender touch. That's my new favorite definition. Dr. Kim, what's your final thought on this topic?
You said it so well there. I do. I think most people know how much I think this is important. Not the most important thing in your marriage, like Christina said, but it's such a way to connect and put you closer together. So if it's not where you want it to be, take that first step, sit down, talk about it, and then decide. You need to go to doctors, you need to counselor, whatever you need to do, begin to move forward. Don't miss out on this gift that God gave you.
Yeah, that is so good. Well, next week on the podcast, we're going to be sharing the number 2 marriage mistake that Dr. Kim sees. So be sure to tune back into the podcast for that conversation next week to find out what that number 2 marriage mistake is. And hey, as always, if you need anything at all, we love it when you reach out to us. You can email us at info@awesomemarriage.com or message us on Instagram. And if the podcast has helped you, will you take a minute and do us a favor and help out the ministry of Awesome Marriage? Will you share the podcast with a friend? Share it on social media, tag us. We love it when you do that. Email it to a friend, tell someone about the podcast. I am sure you have friends whose marriages could benefit from Dr. Kim's teaching and his wisdom. So be sure to share the podcast with others today. It is a real gift to the ministry and to us when you do that. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.